Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again. How are you all? Hope you're doing great. Today I'm going to talk about the new passive tree that's coming with 2.1, which just has a few slight revisions here and there, a pretty reworked shadow area, and just a few slight changes beyond that, as well as a whole bunch of extra chaos damage nodes. Now, I'm not going to go over everything or every change on the tree, just a few impressions about certain key nodes that were changed and what they could mean to certain builds and the game itself. So I'll start things off with saying, yep, this is going to come into play in 2.1, which is on Friday in just a couple of days, and there's some pretty decent changes. One of the main ones that I'd like to talk about is basically this entire node. So if we just grab a mock-up of our Wind Ripper tree, this entire circle here, just below the duelist area, is going to be quite vital as far as I see it to most elemental damage builds, elemental attack damage builds. Bear in mind it says attack damage here for both the mana and the life leech, so it doesn't work for spells, it's just for, bow attacks, melee attacks, that sort of thing. And it works with elemental because it is now attack damage. So with these these three nodes here, you get 1.6% attack damage leached. If you grab that node as well, that is an investment of 4 points, let's just say, for basically cancelling out the life leech gem. So that saves an entire gem socket for elemental builds, which is something that elemental builds always pretty much used a gem socket on. So now you have an extra link for damage in your arsenal there. On top of that, we now have Spirit Void, which is 0.8% attack damage leached as mana, as well as another couple here, so it ends up giving you 2% leached as mana, as well as Essence Sap, which can be a great alternative to this one, so you can grab these 3 points instead of these 2 points, and for some builds it will be better because it's also got the mana gained on hit. But what we're actually looking at here is attack damage leached as mana, meaning you leech as mana from your elemental damage as well as your physical. Whereas before there was only physical leech in the game, except for the mana leech gem, which is a worthless slot, basically. What this means, though, is we can potentially drop a blood magic gem as well in our elemental builds. So you're going to be able to reserve 75% of your mana through an aura and 1 herald, as opposed to an aura and 2 heralds. So you drop a herald and you lose the blood magic gem. So that frees up yet another gem socket. So with these two combos here, we can potentially save 2 gem sockets for our 6-link setup, which is absolutely huge. So based off of this alone, for a build like a Wind Ripper life character, a sword elemental buzzsaw, depending on how well your mana leech is going to work here, we could potentially be saving 2 entire gem sockets, and that's a huge buff to elemental builds, because you have a lot of options for elemental builds as far as gems go, more so than physical builds. Like you have your added lightning, added cold, faster attacks, weapon damage, crit multi, you can go power charge on crit if you really want, you can go crit strikes, there's a lot of just juicy things to get that more and more gem sockets is always going to be beneficial to elemental characters. So as far as I'm concerned, these are going to make elemental versions of most builds pretty much strictly more desired than physical versions. Because the physical versions with this coming into play are only going to outweigh the elemental versions when you have really insane weapons. So I'm talking 350 DPS crit daggers. And that is very hard to come by, whereas a shitty crit elemental dagger, pretty damn easy to come by. Same with a Wind Ripper, that's always just going to be out there as your baseline weapon. So long story short, you probably won't be able to attack super fast with this because of the attack damage leached as mana. So as long as you're running around one-shotting things with your Wind Ripper character, you'll be fine. You one-shot, you get your mana back, you move on with life, that's fine. Something like Frenzy, probably still going to have to be attached to blood magic. But this basically means you don't need a life leech gem. Might not even need Valpact, but for really heavy DPS builds like a Wind Ripper, you're probably going to need Valpact. So that's still an extra point there, and then you might want the extra 0.4% leech. So that still covers an entire life leech gem, and then you have the option of grabbing Valpact too. And lastly, for this I will mention, it's going to make acuities basically just another, it's going to make them a top tier item again for many more builds. Right now, acuities have somewhat limited usage because they're just not that great in a lot of builds, but this basically means that acuities are going to be insane for every single elemental crit build, because instant leech is great, it saves you a Val Pact basically, and you can still have regen. But instant leech towards your mana means you can then spam super fast attacks as long as you have a bit of mana leech here. So for Wind Ripper, if you get some acuities, you're going to pretty much cap your crit anyway. You're going to be instantly leeching mana, like 100% of the time, and you can attack as fast as you want, and just keep it up, strictly off mana, with a 6-link purely focused on damage. So that's going to be quite insane. That's the biggest difference around here. Aside from that, Duelist doesn't get too many other changes, not that I've noticed anyway. Not too much happening down here. Nothing really changes there. Spirit Void, like Essence Sap, like I mentioned, good change there. Probably going to actually be utilized quite a lot in several builds. Next of all, Ranger kind of got changed. Now, I don't know if I like this or not. The bow side of things, not too bad, just condensed like a point or two, which is okay. It makes me feel like going through here to get the static electricity gem for most elemental builds is a little bit more worth it. I don't know if that's just in my imagination, but it feels more worth it doing this now. Besides that though, these nodes kind of average, honestly, because they turned in one of the attack speed and one-hand damage nodes here into a strict dual wielding node, so you've lost that, but you get these dual wield nodes. If you dual wield, then yeah, these aren't too bad to grab. But beside that, you lost a bit of crit from Shadow, and you kind of make it up here, but you're probably not grabbing that for almost any build except for a bow build. And beside that, they also changed the start of the Ranger, so there used to be an 8 attack speed node here, which made Ranger basically the best choice for any attack build, just because you always got that free 8 attack speed node. But now they changed it to 16 projectile damage and 10 projectile for attack speed. This basically makes this entire Ranger start here extremely desirable for projectile based characters. So before it wouldn't really matter too much if you started Ranger or not, you wouldn't really even grab these nodes until the very end of your build, but now these 3 proj nodes, when they're gated behind this one and that one, are really quite worth grabbing, so I think they're usually going to be my Buzzsaw starts. Or at least just to jump through them and grab them. It's going to be more often than not worth it, I think. So that's the Ranger. It's not going to be the best build anymore for every character because it's not really catered to every character. It's just projectile damage. So that's a decent kind of change, I suppose, to shift the meta away from Rangers just for every single attack build. Now next we have the Shadow rework. Which is kind of awkward, kind of weird. Maybe we just need time to get used to it, I don't know. But it is kind of goofy. To start with, we lost 40% crit in the form of these 2 crit nodes. There used to be 2 of these. 2 of these either end of Assassination. Now there's only 1 of each, so in total, your crit builds will lose 40% crit. It's not a huge deal, but ultimately, it does make getting crit just a little bit harder. And you can only make it up for a physical build really with these 2 points, but speaking of this entire area, it feels kind of awkward and I'm not sure I'm a fan. It's only really good for certain like physical, very very physical builds, because these like 8 nodes here feel kind of terrible to grab. So more often than not, I'll be doing something like that if I want some fizz and some crit. Maybe grabbing that, and then you just leave all of that alone, which is kind of weird, I don't know. But for that, that's actually not too bad. You just never really want to travel through this area, because it feels, I don't know, awkward. You still might, though, in certain situations. On top of that, they got some damage over time effect nodes. This would be pretty worth traveling through if you're actually making a damage over time build, which I happen to make over here, just a contagion one. Which also brings me to these nodes. They've turned into physical damage and chaos damage, kind of a hybrid Viper Strike sort of node, or just pure chaos damage. They're very good nodes. 12 life, 14 chaos, that's a great starting one. And then you get a bunch of chaos all the way through here. So for these, if you're going to start a Contagion character, your first like 10 levels are insane here. Or Viper Strike, whatever. You get a huge amount of your chaos damage and damage over time just to start with right off the get-go there. And then on top of that, they added a whole bunch of chaos damage nodes, so all in all, there is an insane amount of chaos damage and damage over time on the tree now. Which brings me, or leads me to the conclusion that Contagion's either going to be so weak that you need insane amounts of scaling through the tree, in forms of chaos damage, damage over time to make it playable, or it's going to be so overpowered because there's such an extreme amount of scaling to go towards it. I don't feel like there's going to be too much of a middle ground for Contagion. I obviously have no idea, haven't tried it, don't know anything about it really, except that I do think that dots, damage over times, don't really have much of a middle ground. It's either they're going to be weak as piss, or they're going to obliterate everything, at least on solo, single player style builds. So this is just the Contagion tree I worked up. I managed to grab pretty much all of the new chaos damage and damage over time, and I'll go over it here real quick. This node over here, actually a very welcome sort of node, even if you're not a damage over time build. Shadows, or this side of the tree, now is a good option for 3 points to get 2% life regen, which goes a long way to cancelling out Blood Rage. So I might even be grabbing this on plenty of characters, damage over time regardless, just to get 2% extra life regen and cancel out Blood Rage, or help towards making EB actually sustain. So I'm pretty happy with those, they're fairly nice. These very big chaos damage, pretty damn useful for something like your Contagion builds or whatnot. And then on top of that, they gave you a good fizz wheel, which will only really be worth it if you're kind of right next to it already. Otherwise it feels, I don't know, a bit weak. If you travel to these, I'm not sure you're going to be grabbing them. It's going to be worth grabbing is what I mean to say. If you're kind of nearby, then yeah, by all means. Like I believe I made a Blade Vortex build. So I'm grabbing these spell crit nodes regardless, which means I don't have to waste any points getting up here, which means these are pretty worth grabbing, I would say. Whereas if you weren't crit and you had to grab this extra int node, I'm not sure it's worth grabbing. That's what I'm trying to say there. But they're pretty cool nodes, 5% extra fizz as chaos, that's alright. Besides that, I think Contagion, there's not too much you can do, so I feel like something like scaling your curses is going to be worth doing, making vulnerability stronger, and as well as that, maybe throwing in another curse. Which is why, since we're so close to this curse over here by getting so much extra chaos and damage over time, I feel like getting a second curse is going to be really worth it here. For, I don't know, Temp Chains, Enfeeble, whatever you want, but you're going to need vulnerability and then something else. So I feel that's pretty good. It actually gives you a reason to go this far into the tree, which I've never really done before, to want to get that second curse. I think that's pretty nifty, rather cool. As far as changes to this side of the tree, nothing else really changed here. They just gave you these chaos nodes. This node here did change actually. It turned from elemental damage to spells, I think it was, into pure spell damage. That's a lot less confusing, a lot nicer node now. It's pretty desirable as a strict node just to get. Before it was, yeah, I don't know, fairly confusing. You weren't sure what it worked with, what it didn't work with. Now it's just pure spell damage. That should work with just about every spell out there. Pretty worth grabbing. And makes going to the Witch Tree just a little bit more desirable. Besides that, not too many other changes. There's a whole bunch of mine changes and all that. This changed from like from down there to up here. A lot of the mine and trap nodes got severely buffed. I'm not going to go too much into that because I'm not a huge fan of mines and traps. I will mention this one though, Hasty Reconstruction. I don't think that existed before, and 30% increased cooldown recovery for traps is actually pretty damn beefy. It's going to increase your clear speed of trapping quite substantially, I would say, because it allows you to throw a lot more traps out, probably on average an extra 1 trap per those 3 that you start with, because the recovery is something like 30% faster now. So if you're going to be a trap build, that's actually really good news for you. Besides that, what else do we have? Yep, they consolidated those all different types of elemental nodes and turned them into these. So they're not too bad. For 2 points, you're usually going to grab that for pretty much every elemental build. Don't know if I actually have any elemental builds to showcase for that. No, not really. Well, Wind Ripper, but I kind of didn't want to grab that. I was starved on points. Sword Buzzsaw grabs it. But what I want to say with these is, it used to give you the chance of taking another 5% chance to shock, ignite, freeze. They've removed that with this and gave you extra duration of elemental status ailments, a 10% chance to avoid elemental status ailments. I'm not a big fan of that, because this was a good node over here to scale whatever non-crit damage you were doing to have another extra 5% chance to use its effect. So for example, I think my High-End clone actually used to grab that, which was going over here and going over here to give you 15% chance to shock in total. Whereas now we can only grab 10% chance to shock in total. That's a reduction of, 30% or something. So that's pretty disappointing, I would say. So it kind of makes a non-crit just a little bit worse to scale there. Still not too bad, I suppose. But it does bring me to the entire shadow tree here, and it just feels awkward. I don't know how to travel through it well anymore. Grabbing like this power charge is going to be weird for most builds. You're going to need to use an extra point somewhere. Sniper feels really weird. Don't know how much I want to grab that on most builds. Like, here it is. 3 points to grab Sniper now. I don't know how worth it that is. It's an extra point to grab Sniper as opposed to before, because it used to be 2 points. And it does open up this for 1 point, which is okay. But it still doesn't feel worth it in the end. I don't think, anyway. This changed to attack damage instead of melee damage, so that's a good node for most builds now. You'll pretty much always be taking that if you're right next to it, whereas you used to get just right next to it and most builds wouldn't even take it. Now you get a nice good 10 int, which is actually pretty useful, and attack damage. So that's good. But this node, yeah, I don't know. I don't see myself taking it on too many builds is the problem. It just feels weird positioning. But aside from that, that also reminds me, they nerfed Blood Siphon and Life here. These used to be 6% nodes and a 12% node. It's now 5 and 10s. I honestly cannot fathom any idea of why they would remove that. Losing us a few percent points of life on Shadow. It's not going to change my world too much. I mean, yeah, it's annoying, but it's not going to break the game. It's just that we lost, what, 4% life or something for no reason at all, without really any compensation. I mean, yeah, there's your compensation, which you have to put extra points into getting. So, I don't know, that's a bit of a dunce move, I think. It's going to make you want to go to the sign wheel just a little bit more. But as always, this side of the tree for me fills out most of the life by getting lots of jewel sockets and getting life nodes, life jewels in those sockets. So if there's anything else to explore, let me just do a quick recap. Yeah, like I said, most of the trap nodes were buffed roughly by double or something even. So you get a lot more trap damage and mine damage out of picking up the nodes. If you're into traps and mines, that is good news. I'm not particularly. There is this node here, 100% increased damage with poison, 10% chance to poison on hit, and another 25. So 125 damage to poisons for 3 points. Seems pretty insane. And they also changed Adder's Touch for critical strikes with daggers, have a 30% chance to poison the enemy, as opposed to critical strikes poison the enemy. So that's pretty substantial nerf, but I'm not sure it's going to make too much of a difference. If you're critting 100% of the time anyway, you're pretty much always going to be poisoning things. And poison might end up being really, really strong, depending on, I don't know, how it feels. But it seems like they're making a pretty big push for Viper Strike with nodes like that. And so much chaos damage to get, and damage over time over here. So Viper Strike might actually become somewhat viable. If not with Melee Splash, because that might just feel weird or awkward, definitely as a single target, it might actually reign supreme as the best single target out there with the right nodes, which might be worth picking up as a dagger build, just as a supplement to your build, without even really focusing too much on chaos or damage over time. I think Vibe Strike seems like they're making a pretty good push for it. I'm definitely going to try it out at some point, and yeah, it has potential, I think. Besides that, yeah, Contagion with all of these nodes, you can actually build, like I said, some pretty insane Contagion scaling. So this mock-up I made for an EB, so just a, self-cast Contagion sort of thing. Not a trap build. I feel like traps might be a bit too slow for Contagion, even if the damage is there. But what ends up happening is, with our scaling, I have 240% chaos damage, 134% damage over time. You have some good area damage, that actually reminds me, and some pretty good spell damage. So in the end, the build has something like 500% damage towards the Contagion. It's quite a lot. So if the skill actually does any good damage, this could be insane. That totally reminds me, they did change up the AoE nodes. That's probably the last thing I need to mention. Both AoE nodes in the Templar and the Witch side. You got Amplify over here. These are now 5%, so they're pretty much going to be worth grabbing all three for any AoE sort of build, whereas I'd usually leave one out when you didn't need to take it. Then they changed that to 20% area damage and 5%. So it's a slight nerf to the area effect in total, what you used to be able to get, but they did say that they're compensating with that for making any sort of area type gems to have more area without taking passives. So hopefully it still feels roughly the same, but these nodes are actually pretty good now for area damage and still for area effect. So all in all, I think that's fine and should be fine. Yeah, no, passive tree looks pretty good, I think. It should be fun to play around with a few different builds and just get used to managing to build a shadow and build a ranger. I think there's a certain potential for a pretty smooth tree. Like I said, elemental attack damage. Most builds are probably going to want to travel down here. It might not be worth it if you're really not going anywhere near the duelist side. Some builds it'll take, about 12 points to get down here. In that case, it might not be worth it. But even then, I don't know, most of my elemental builds are definitely going to be going down to the duelist tree, because there's a lot of other perks to being a duelist, or in that duelist range, to then pick up this as well. One thing it hasn't done though is made me want to roll a duelist. This hasn't really changed at all, and I don't really care for it. I think I'd rather just make the little bit of a traverse, grab that, come down here, grab that. As per my high on build, that's grabbing it. Wind Ripper Life, that's grabbing it. Elemental Buzzsaw, we're getting some of that. Oxpin, I don't believe that's getting it. No. But pretty much every elemental build. It'll be interesting to see how it interacts with the mana leech. Maybe we'll actually have to invest in a bit more mana, just to have a larger mana pool to sustain that mana leech. You probably won't be able to attack too fast. All in all, pretty exciting stuff. Yeah, it'll be just really interesting to see how it goes. I think a lot of the changes do seem to be catered more towards Ascendancy, which is the expansion coming in something like March or April next year. And they have been made with those subclasses in mind. But we'll play around as of Friday and the new league and see what we can come up with and see if it feels pretty good. I think it should. I think there's good things to look forward to. That's my view of the passive tree and notes on the changes. Hope you gained something out of watching or listening to this. Yeah, I'm Matthew. Thanks for watching once again, and see you guys next time.